fact, they're not even coming anymore because they know they can't get through. But what took place is totally unacceptable. The UN is supposed to stop invasions, not create them and not finance them. In the United States, we reject the idea that mass numbers of people from foreign lands can be permitted to travel halfway around the world, trample our borders, violate our sovereignty, cause unmitigated crime, and deplete our social safety net. We have reasserted that America belongs to the American people, and I encourage all countries to take their own stand in defense of their citizens as well.
So Democrats are having a pretty rough time today after they're being forced to come to grips with the fact that actually President Trump's international policy is working pretty well, a whole lot better than their own. And it turns out the so-called unstable madman actually kind of knows what he's doing. Whether it's the obviously headline news of the day, which is that the final hostages were returned from Gaza today and the peace accords were officially signed between Israel and Hamas. This is obviously a landmark accomplishment of Trump's presidency and something that many people on, frankly, both sides thought would be impossible to accomplish. It's worth noting that President Biden essentially did try to get done the exact same thing, but he failed ultimately. Why? Because it turns out the orange Cheeto that supposedly has no clue what he's doing in the White House, right? Imagine trusting that guy with the nuclear codes is a lot better than 40 to 50 years of political establishment rule. Or today's story on immigration, which ties in further to what I would call an aspect of, you could say in a sense, right, Trump foreign policy, where as you can see, this migrant caravan, which would have historically just tried to storm the U.S. southern border, is instead now diverting from the U.S. for Mexico City as Trump's immigration policies are deterring migrants from entering the U.S. This is something that could basically be summed up in this legendary clip right here.
The media and our friends in the Democrat Party kept saying we needed new legislation. We must have legislation to secure the border. But it turned out that all we really needed was a new president.
Now, you may be wondering why exactly I'm tying these two stories together. Well, aside from the fact that they're both related to relevant current events, I think secondly, they display why the tenets of Trumpism work, and that is because they're based in common sense, which is, I know, something that has been said time and time again, but I mean this on a sincere, deep level. I think so many Democrat policies, especially in the past several decades, are such complicated overthinkings, basically, of very simple problems. I've raised this issue on crime a million times, which was a huge national debate in the months of August and September. Because when you ask a right-winger, what is the solution to dealing with crime? They would say, okay, arrest the criminals and strengthen the police. Very simple, straightforward A to B solutions. You want to stop crime, create deterrences for the criminals. But you ask a left-winger, how do you solve crime? It's like this 50-page garbage of social science. Well, no, I don't actually think we should fund the police. If we defunded the police and put that money into education and social programs, then maybe that would alleviate the socioeconomic factors that are causing the poverty that is driving the crime. And it's like, and in the end, they don't actually accomplish it because the entire thing is like hypothetical and abstract. This is a very important life lesson, frankly, that I think a lot of leftists need to learn, which is that, you know, if your idea cannot be explained, at least the core reasoning behind it, in a very simple A to B or maybe an A, B to C manner, right? If you have to go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and it's like all over the place, and then hypothetically maybe we'll solve the problem at the end, then you're not implementing serious policies for a country. You're basically running an elaborate social experiment. And the same is true, for instance, on the Israel negotiations, right? President Biden tried to basically get actually a very similar peace deal done to Trump, But how did he approach it? Let's get in this think tank room of like 100 State Department diplomats, because after all, I'm a figure of the political establishment, right? I'm not this crazy, like unhinged person like Trump who would just pick up the phone and start threatening people. Let's approach this with real diplomacy. And in the end, what did that approach get done, right? All the diplomatic garbage, all the bureaucracy, nothing. What was Trump's approach to this situation, ladies and gentlemen? Basically just threaten and bully whoever he needed to, sometimes using economic leverage, sometimes even just deciding, hey, I'm going to go bomb Iran, to ultimately get both sides to surrender in the fighting and come to America and say, okay, fine, we'll sign the peace deal. And that same exact thing, ladies and gentlemen, is true here today on this story of the migrant caravans, further highlighting how Trump's very basic idea of, hey, we can secure the border by securing the border, again, works very well because it is rooted in common sense. You heard from Kamala Harris. You've heard, by the way, from so many leftist figures that you're not really going to solve migration by just like, rooting people out or deporting people. We have to address root causes. Remember that garbage? We've heard it time and time again.
DHS
whatever the number is,
that number for the record, they say it's closer to 8 to 10 million.
But I think there are reasons to think that DHS is underestimating. Whatever the real number is, it's way too high, right? It's millions upon millions of illegal immigrants that have come in just since Kamala Harris became the border czar a few years ago.
She was put in charge of the root causes of migration.
Well, the root causes of migration, I would say, Kristen, is that Kamala Harris refuses to do her job as border czar.
The basic theory behind that, similar to crime, similar to, hey, let's ask a million bureaucrats how to solve foreign policy, even though they clearly don't know what they're doing, is that, well, if we address the socioeconomic factors driving poverty and crime and violence in Latin America, then maybe in like 30 years, people would have less incentive to come to America because, they're going to have a better situation in their home countries. That, by the way, is actually the leftist theory on migration. And it's like, okay, first of all, how do you know they're going to stop coming? Because if the situation in America is still economically better, people are still going to seek better opportunity. Firstly. Secondly, okay, what are we supposed to do between now and 30 years? Just let in 10 million people? Well, we'll get into this whole story here today, and I'll kind of, again, tie it back to how the greater picture of why leftist policies, which are so overly complicated and defy common sense, don't actually work. First, though, guys, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. That is the best way to support our work and ensure that we can keep bringing you these videos. And that said, okay, so let us get into this story. Again, very simple, straightforward. It turns out when you secure the border and tell people they're not going to be able to just cross into the United States, abuse the claim of asylum, which is what they've been doing under the Biden administration and frankly for many years, that people stop trying to migrate to the United States. Oh, really, really interesting, right? Here's the story from Fox News. A 1,200-person caravan of largely Cuban migrants is heading north from Mexico's southern city of Tapachula in a weeks-long pursuit of better economic opportunities. But its destination is not the U.S. border, it is Mexico City, right? So keep in mind, we've seen a lot of these migrant caravans throughout the years. Some of you may remember that one that tried to storm the border before the 2018 midterms to create a problem for Trump. And then the Biden presidency, of course, essentially one big, long migrant caravan. But suddenly now they're not headed for our southern border. I really wonder why that could be the case, huh? Because again, I thought we needed a 1,000-page piece of legislation from the Biden administration to actually solve border security. But as Trump is pointing out, turns out we didn't need legislation. Why is that? Because the destination of the caravan signals a stark shift in regional trends as President Donald Trump's strict immigration policies take hold. Ding, ding, ding. Big surprise, right? We're so shocked to find this out. The caravan, which departed earlier this month, is expected to take weeks to reach its destination, where migrants hope to find higher paying jobs in Mexico's capital city rather than its impoverished south. By the way, I want to point this out as well, right? So we're talking about people who supposedly claim that they're seeking asylum, and yet you'll notice the real reason apparently boils down to economic opportunities, which is so often the Democrat contradiction on this issue, right? You've heard for the past several years how they've tried to abuse the semantics of saying, well, they're not illegal aliens because they're asylum seekers. Basically, the insane liberal policy we had in this country is if you illegally cross the border and then just say, hey, I'm seeking asylum, then we would just process you as an asylum seeker. Well, first of all, that is not actually legitimate. You are supposed to seek asylum in the first safe harbor country, and unless you're fleeing from Mexico itself, which most of these people nowadays are not even doing, then that is not a real asylum claim. But secondly, I would like to point out further, right, that people sometimes say, well, they're fleeing poverty in their countries, or they're maybe fleeing the cartels or gang violence. Ladies and gentlemen, those are not asylum seekers. This is something we need to point out. It's very important because it highlights how Democrats have so ruthlessly abused American law for so long. And then, of course, when it comes to immigration or deportations, are now telling us that we're the bad guys because we're enforcing it. So we'd just like to point out that according to the U.S. Department of State, there is a formal definition of asylum. And it does not mean I'm poor, so I want to come here, or it's kind of just generally like there's high crime in my area, so I want to come here. No, that's not a valid reason. An asylee, I should say, is a non-citizen who is in the U.S. and is unable or unwilling to return to their country because of persecution or a well-founded fear on account of race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. Asylum is the protection granted to such individuals to allow them to remain in the United States instead of being removed. So as you can see, right, you have to actually be actively being persecuted largely in a political context. So even if you're dealing with general gang violence or crime, or poverty, obviously, not even nearly constituting it, no, that's not asylum. You have to be targeted basically by a political or governmental entity. Now, in fairness to these people, you could argue, it's Cuba, so it's a little different, but generally speaking, you could argue, right, that, well, if we're going to say the cartels are terrorist organizations and are basically a paramilitary and para-government in those places, then maybe that's a valid claim. However, I was told by Democrats, right, that the cartels are not supposed to be terrorist organizations. That's what they've been telling us. You can't strike the drug boats, because to say La Sinoa or Tren de Aragua or MS-13 are terrorist organizations is such a ridiculous abuse of power. Okay, Democrats, you can't have it both ways. Either the cartels are actually legitimately sources of asylum, or they're not. Because simply saying, oh, I'm scared of the gangs, again, does not meet the legal definition of asylum, which is to say, of these some like 10 million or so asylum seekers allowed into this country under the Biden administration, you probably venture to guess less than 1% of those claims were legitimate. And yet, what insane policy did we practice? Catch and release, right? Don't tell them they have to go seek in Mexico. No, just come over the border, claim they're seeking asylum, never show up for their court date in 5 years, and use that as a way to immigrate into the country. No, obviously, right? The system was being massively abused the entire time. By the way, the further question I have on this asylum front is, why exactly is it always America's obligation to seek asylum? Like, these people, for instance, are fleeing from Cuba, right? And for a long time, so many of them, Cuba, Venezuela, El Salvador, Nicaragua, basically every country in South America and the Caribbean and all those places, they would go on these caravans through like several different parts of different countries to get to the United States, right? But again, if you're legitimately seeking asylum and not just coming to the US because you want to make more money or something, you mean to tell me, okay, let's even say you're fleeing Tren de Aragua in Venezuela. Okay, you can't seek asylum in Colombia or Panama or El Salvador or Costa Rica or Mexico or like any of the countries you're going to cross up through that journey, right? Why is it always the duty of the United States to harbor all of the supposed refugees and asylum seekers of the world, which we've been doing for decades? At what point do we say, hey, we've kind of done our part, you other countries need to do yours? Well, interestingly, that does appear to be what is happening here, right? Because the caravan departed earlier this month, is expected to take weeks, and migrants hope to find higher paying jobs not in America, but Mexico's capital city, rather than its impoverished south. So there you go. Now it's not our problem anymore, right? Let another country deal with the so-called asylum seekers and migrants. Now, according to the Washington Office on Latin America, The group of migrants is using social media to petition the Mexican government to assist with asylum cases and proper documentation for people officially looking to reside in Mexico City. These people themselves claim they're fleeing gang violence and poverty stemming from the Northern Triangle. So there you go, right? By the way, worth noting as well, another point I'd like to make on this is, not sure if you've heard, but over in Mexico, turns out they're actually not so happy with a lot of the migrants coming in, and there have actually been recent cases of Cuban migrants being deported from Mexico back to Cuba. To which I say, you know, it's so evil when America does it, but when other places, Latino countries, do the exact same thing, enforce their borders, enforce their laws, nothing to say there, right?
Y nos quieren, ahora nos exportan para atrás. El presidente de la República de México nos dio salvoconducto a nosotros. Ahora nos van a maltratar ahí.
I mean, hey, where are the protests? What happened to Viva La Raza? And, you know, this is the Gestapo and Nazi Germany and all those things. Huh? Very interesting. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. Despite concerns over financial abuse in attempting to relocate in Mexico, a Spain-based news outlet reported that many migrants are now still considering staying in Mexico, preferable to heading to the US under Trump. Well, there you go. There you go, right? Thank you, President Trump. You made this so easy, right? The international image that supposedly has been created that is so bad, so cruel. It turns out it's actually deterring people from wanting to come illegally to the United States, which is the entire point, ladies and gentlemen. Anyways, and I quote, "Why would I want to go to the United States? They hate us there," one Cuban woman traveling with her 2-year-old daughter and 18-year-old son told a news outlet. Well, they don't hate Cuban people in the United States. There's actually a lot of Cuban people here in Florida where I live. But, you know, there's a distinction, obviously, between people who have lived here for many decades and came legally or have citizenship versus, you know, those who are trying to illegally cross the border. But apparently this is a distinction that is confusing to people, apparently. But anyways, while immigration to the U.S. under Trump, particularly his second term, has drastically dropped, the decision by Cuban migrants to not pursue life in the U.S., where there are already large communities with deep U.S. ties in places like Florida and New York, is significant. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. And again, just to briefly recap, these caravans have stopped trying to come to the United States because, again, it turns out we didn't need new legislation. We just needed a new president.
He took an oath to protect this country, to protect it from all enemies, foreign and domestic, and he has to, because Kamala Harris told him to, release illegal aliens into this country with minimal processing and minimal security. It breaks his heart that he's not allowed to do his job. And why is he not allowed to do his job? Because Kamala Harris, she suspended deportations on day one. She ended Donald Trump's Remain in Mexico policy, and she re-implemented the catch and release disaster that allows a lot of illegal aliens to commit fraud on our asylum system. You know what Donald Trump and I want to do? We want to go to war with the Mexican drug cartels. We want to close down the American southern border. We want to reinstitute deportations, and we want to stop the insanity at the southern border.
Well, nice to see that all of those things actually did happen, right? Again, it is basic common sense. For instance, if you legalize stealing, you say, let's take a hypothetical Democrat policy that definitely didn't actually happen. You can shoplift anything under $900 and it won't be prosecuted as a crime. Then what's going to happen? Some well-meaning people will still have respect for the system, but naturally predators are going to take advantage of it, right? They're going to start stealing stuff under $900 because you said it was okay. Same is true on the border, right? All this nonsense about root causes, which is basically, by the way, an excuse to funnel money to USAID so they can do all these like nonsensical foreign aid diplomatic projects in Latin America that don't actually do anything. But again, same strategy. No, when you open the border and furthermore do what the Biden administration did, which is, hey, we're also going to give you like free housing and free flights, and we're certainly not going to deport you, and here's even like a temporary legal protection to be in America, then obviously people are going to surge to the border. because they want to come and they understand it's easy and they understand they're allowed to do it, right? Simple incentive structure. You incentivize something, people are going to do it more. You de-incentivize something, people are going to do it less. It's not all that complicated. But again, yet another highlighting of how these overthought Democrat policies and approaches to issues don't actually work. That said, I also want to show you the hilarious chronicle today. Similarly on international policy, because, I would argue you're solving one border conflict, now another, right? We are also witnessing as Democrats are being forced to basically sit here and very begrudgingly give Trump credit for ending the war between Israel and Hamas. Here, for instance, is the statement from President Clinton, where he actually says, "I'm grateful that a ceasefire has taken hold, that the last 20 living hostages have been freed, and that desperately needed aid has begun to flow into Gaza. President Trump and his administration, Qatar, and other regional actors deserve great credit for keeping everyone engaged until the agreement was reached. Now Israel and Hamas, with the support of the U.S. region and world, must try to turn this fragile moment into lasting peace that provides the dignity and security of both Palestinians and Israelis." Well, I further note as well, although Clinton was not nearly as insane as the Democrats of today, he tried to solve this Israel-Palestine issue decades ago in the 1990s. He ultimately failed. Arafat walked away from the deal, but that's interesting. Right? Someone who doesn't come from the political establishment and just uses their head can solve this much more simply. Take a listen as well as the ladies of The View are kind of forced to not have a bitter meltdown about Trump for once, and it's kind of hilarious.
I think everyone should be able to celebrate it. And listen, whether you like Trump or not, I think Steve Witkoff and I think Jared Kushner do deserve credit for this deal. They actually personally met with Hamas. I used to be of the mind we don't negotiate with terrorists, but sometimes the only way to get peace is to sit down with some of the most evil people and try to come up with what we can do to end the bloodshed. So thank God, I pray that this peace holds.
Yeah. Well, and knowing that Hamas has no power, one thing they kept sticking on every time these ceasefires didn't work is they did not want to cede power because they had their tunnel system and they were using their citizens as human shields, and the devastation, they did not want to hand it over, and then they were destroyed. They really had no choice, but I think the speech we saw today is going to hold to account also Prime Minister Netanyahu, because Donald Trump went on record saying there are things that Israel now needs to do as well. So this deal was a compromise. Neither side got everything they wanted, but most importantly, those hostages are home, aid is flooding into Gaza, and Hamas has no power ever again in that area.
Well, this is actually really interesting because I would label this as another victory for common sense. Why? Because we were told by the rabid, sort of immovable fanatics on both sides that a deal here would be impossible because it was the other side's fault, right? So the hardcore neocons, for instance, the people who were criticizing Trump for even trying to speak with people here, said that there's no way you're going to make a deal because Hamas are terrorists and they can't be negotiated with, right? They can't be reasoned with. Meanwhile, the hardcore Palestine activists said the same exact thing about Israel. Well, they said Israel are terrorists. Israel's committing a genocide, so they can't be talked to either. And common sense says what, right? When two sides like rabidly hate each other, still, to have any shot at a peace deal, reasonably speaking, you're going to have to speak with both sides. You're going to have to try to approach a negotiation with both parties and talk, right? And that's obviously what the fanatics didn't want to do, is actually talk with one another. But when they did, right, you actually got a deal. Isn't it so interesting how that all works? And obviously, right, when you're making a deal between two opposing parties, there's going to have to be what? Another common sense idea. You're going to have to find a compromise solution that works for both sides. A lot of people don't want to do this, or they want to get stuck in so much State Department bureaucracy that the actual deal never gets produced, i.e. the Biden administration. And again, Trump just did it. Why? Because common sense is actually, in many ways, the best form of governance. And I think that's what you saw in the Middle East. I think that's what you're seeing right now at the southern border. And ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. So that said, let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new. And until next time, God bless and peace.